My old boss at Uber, who's now a director at Apple, used to say, like, just don't worry about the promotion, just worry about becoming a better engineer. And then the promotion will kind of just happen by itself.
Hey, I'm Felix Tia, and I'm the host of Culture of Code, where we bring on experienced industry leaders from software engineers to engineering managers to product managers on to share what they've learned about growing and succeeding in the tech industry. In this episode, I'm joined by Osman Masood, who's a software development manager at Amazon. Prior to that, he had a decade-long career working at Microsoft to Apple to Uber to startups and now at Amazon. Welcome to the show, Osman.
Thanks, Felix. Great to be on the show.
Yeah, so you got into software engineering because of experience as a child where you were really into games and played games as a kid. And, lots of us play games. Tell us about what that kind of transition was like, where you went from just playing games into being interested in more of the kind of software engineering side, computer science side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was pretty much like super nerdy kid playing games on PC. And I thought, well, the only thing better than this is being able to like make my own games, right? I didn't know any programming at the time. There wasn't really much of too many resources out there or too many websites that taught programming to someone like myself. So local library had no books. And so pretty much, I guess I just had to kind of wait till high school. Even my high school had a computer science curriculum. And so I jumped in as soon as I could, open up the C++ book, and it was really, really hard to learn. And then I learned that game programming is not like playing games. It's quite different, but still, it's like the interest was still there, in coding and the feeling of kind of producing things.
Yeah, I think one of the most rewarding things when you are just starting to learn how to write software is being able to like tangibly see the stuff that you're building. And I think that's maybe at least I can imagine that's what I would be looking for if I was into games and then wanted to become like a game developer, is like be able to create the games that I'm thinking of. What was that for you? Like, I guess what kind of kept you going? Because that's kind of thing that kept me going when I was first starting to learn, is actually be able to tangibly see the stuff I'm building. How did you continue to keep on going when it turned out wasn't as like straightforward or wasn't what you expected originally?
Yeah, so I think I did like little coding projects here and there. So just to help, like, let's say we had like a physics assignment where we had to like do like 1,000 calculations by hand, right? We would like make a program that would allow the class to do that, right? And just kind of share it around and things like that. I think that helped a lot, and just kind of like, oh, I can actually produce something that impacts people, And seeing that in action was kind of really inspiring. And then later on, also early in college, I worked for a professor on a course grading application, or more like it's an app where students could log in and check their grades on assignments. And it didn't really, that was the real customer, like that was the real thing that I think like impacted, a lot of people were like that kind of feeling of, euphoria you get, like, wow, this actually means something to people. And until I worked on that course grading app in college for the professor, and then I had to debug an issue. So I had to like go inside the database and see, once I saw like kids were actually using the thing to upload their grades or to check their grades and things like that, then it actually made me like, oh wow, like this actually has an impact on people's lives. I mean, it was obviously not like a major impact, but it makes some tiny incremental difference in people's lives. And that was like kind of a feeling that was the first time I felt that, and it was something I'll never forget. But I think every programmer has the same kind of feeling where it's like, wow, this actually has an impact.
Yeah, it's crazy to be able to see someone using something that you build, especially if it's like a short kind of feedback cycle where someone that's like your classmate is using it and can actually know who the users are. And I can imagine that that's still obviously very accessible when you are building an app, like you're like the main person, only person building it, and probably still accessible when you work at some smaller startups. But since then, you've gone to like Apple, Uber, now at Amazon, like probably one of the world's like biggest employers. How do you still try to find that kind of similar level of impact when the stuff you're working on is so far removed sometimes from the end customer?
Can still do that. So there are teams at bigger companies where it's like you work on like a critical piece of infrastructure, something that's used by people like every single day, right? Like say at Uber, there's like the driver teams that basically they have the services that pretty much when you open the app, when you click a button, they're the first team that things kind of get routed to. And then there's many other like support teams like way in the background that also have an impact on things. I think that, like the feeling though is you're right though. It is actually a lot harder to have the same feeling at a big company that like, okay, I pretty much built this thing end to end and it's making a big difference. Because no matter what, you're always going to be working on a tiny part of it, right? Like if you work on a high scale, like high TPS transactions per second service, you may not work on the database side of things or downstream layers, right? That other teams will own. So I think that I don't know if it really can be done I don't know if you can quite get the same feeling at a big company, but I think the feeling at big companies is more like, oh, I'm part of a larger group of people that's having a broader impact, right?
Yeah, and for an engineer that is motivated by what you just described, there are, I guess it's kind of like a broad generalization between like an infra kind of engineer versus a product engineer. Do you find that feeling that we just talked about is as accessible or is more accessible at one of these kind of roles versus the other?
Hmm. It's a really good question. Usually closer you are to the customer, the more you can kind of kind of feel it, right? I mean, like I think front end engineers, that's one of the advantages of doing like front end engineering because it's like you can kind of see you get super fast feedback cycles, but then you're kind of like interfacing really directly with the customer, right? It's sort of satisfying to actually be able to see that, right? And then the further down the back end you go, sometimes the technical problems get more interesting, but then you're so far removed from the customer. So maybe there's impact. Like, so yeah, product engineer, front end engineer might be able to see things from the customer standpoint more often, right? But then the further back you go, your customers are kind of like more like other teams within the company or other engineers within the company, right? Those are all important.
That's true. Yeah, customer's not always the end customer that's like using like the app or the website or the software, but could be internal customers and clients that depend on the work that you're working on. During the introduction, I talked about all the amazing companies you've worked at, the big ones that are household names like Microsoft, Apple, Uber, again, at Amazon. I would love to know more about kind of like maybe some of the big lessons that you've learned from being at these different companies. Like, I think the big thing a lot of people wonder is like, how much is the same versus how much is different between some of these like big household names?
That's a very interesting question. So there's something in common with working at most big companies, right? It's kind of like you have to do a lot more meta work at the bigger companies. So you have to do a lot more work to basically get your work visible, right? Make sure that your work is being recognized by the broader team and broader org, by the higher level leaders, right? And so it's kind of like you just want to get credit for your work, right? You don't want to do a lot of work and then no one really sees it, and you don't get credit for it. That's kind of the rationale, and a lot more cross-team collaboration. So in most big companies, cross-team collaboration is encouraged. Like if you have like an impact on another team, right? Or if you can reduce some level of effort by using what another team wrote, right? Then that's kind of like praised, right? That's looked at as going to like the next level of performance. And I guess like the motivations at bigger companies, a lot of engineers are like, okay, they're very focused about the promotion, right? And my old boss at Uber, who is now a director at Apple, used to say like, just don't worry about the promotion, just worry about becoming a better engineer. And then the promotion will kind of just happen by itself. I mean, of course, at some level, you do have to kind of worry about promotions as well. But for the most part, like companies try to design their promotion processes so that being a better engineer will kind of naturally make you just check all the boxes, right? So, for example, performing code reviews of others, right? Writing code that doesn't get too many major comments for a revision, improving the operational excellence of your team, so reducing like the amount of on-call burden if your team has to go on call that they have to experience, doing design work on your team, like writing a little document, be like, hey, these are all the different options I can have to approach a problem. Those are all the kinds of things that you would kind of learn like kind of more formally at a bigger company. And you get the mentorship as well at a bigger company. Mentoring others is also something that's praised as well at a bigger company. You can help onboard an intern or help an intern get a return offer that's impressive, right? Something that could go inside of a promo doc.
I like the idea of just like having this North Star of just becoming a better engineer, and the promotions and like the rewards will kind of fall in line with that like general direction if you're just trying to become a better engineer. I think the one kind of glaring thing is what you mentioned earlier, which is the meta work about how to make sure your work is recognized, which I guess to me, you can argue that that is not about being a better engineer, like the kind of marketing of the work that you do. So I guess how do you reconcile that between like how much effort you should put into like becoming a better engineer by all things you talk about the code reviews, about writing code that doesn't require too many kind of round trips with revisions or writing design docs, but then now also making sure that you're recognized. I guess the recognition is a key piece to getting like the promotion. Like people have to know that you're doing these things that you are doing. How do you reconcile it? And then I guess more tactically, like how do you know how to spend your time maybe between those two, to me, seemingly different skill sets?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, sometimes I feel like doing the thing specifically required for promotion is almost like a second job or like a side hustle, you know? You have like your day job, right? But if you want to have that cross team influence, right? Or that, to come up with some special vision like that, then that's like additional time that you have to spend, right? So then you have an additional, maybe you consider it like an extra 10 to 20% time, in doing that extra work. And you have to also like time management. That's something I still struggle with is time management, right? Like figuring out how to maximize your time so that you're doing like the highest impact things at any given moment, you know? For example, for me, get really into the weeds of things, into the thick of things, whereas probably it's better for me to just not do that, right? And actually my time would be better spent, let's say, maybe talking to other managers or talking or communicating my team's work externally, right? And doing more strategic things or those types of things, right? So let's say as an entry-level engineer, if you find yourself stuck, you ask for help, try to do whatever you can to unblock yourself and try not to just spend cycles just churning away at the same thing over and over again. I was talking to an engineer on the team just yesterday who was kind of like blocked for a little while on something, but then it wasn't super clear that they were blocked on things. I mean, they were kind of mentioning it in stand-up, but then not in super clear terms. And so feedback is kind of like, okay, just keep on, like as a manager, it's my job to help unblock you, right? Keep pinging me. Like managers are pinged by like 10 different people all the time or something. So if you're not getting the help you need, just keep at it over and over again. And then they're like, okay, fine. Let me do this for you. That's something that you have to kind of like really be strategic about thinking how you maximize your time. I think it is possible to do both, to kind of focus on your own skills as well as the meta work. But you just have to be really, really strategic and prioritize your time and really think beforehand how you're going to spend every day.
Yeah, so I would now love to transition to hear more about the lessons learned from these different individual companies that you've been at. These are the big ones that people might recognize.
Yeah, so at the time, I didn't work in Azure. I heard that Azure is different. But for me, fresh out of college, the work-life balance was amazing. I just honestly spent like a lot of time playing video games. I mean, they had a game room. It's kind of, I don't know, a way for me to just like kind of relax after graduation, I guess. Once I onboarded to the code base, like I felt like I could have taken on more work and more responsibility, but I don't know, I guess I just wasn't like super motivated to do that. I just wanted to kind of chill out. But it's amazing. There are good engineers there too, right? I think there's great engineers at every company. That's kind of my experience with Microsoft. But then at the same time, this was during the Ballmer era, by the way. Currently, the company is doing a lot better. But in the Ballmer era, the technology they had was amazing. They actually they pretty much had Siri, okay? They pretty much had like a voice recognition thing. It could buy movie tickets. It could check stock prices. It could set alarm for you, right? They had the technology there, but they just couldn't really productize it in a way that was effective. That was the whole thing at Microsoft. Like, wow, there's behind the scenes, there's amazing stuff going on, but people are just not seeing it. So at Apple has a very different culture than most other tech companies, and it's very secretive, So surprise and delight are two important keywords constantly mentioned at Apple. Surprise and delight the customers. Like when the first iPhone came out, right? No one knew about it, not even any rumors, nothing, right? And when it was revealed, I think that was what Steve Jobs, like, just one more thing phrase, like everyone gave him a standing ovation. It was just phenomenal, right? So they want to kind of recreate that experience with all their products. Now, of course, at scale, it's a lot harder with so many more people. But so teams at Apple are sort of discouraged from talking to each other for that reason. So like, let's say if you have lunch with a random person, you can't really talk about what you work on. Everyone has their own NDA. Every team has their own NDA. Every project, every major release has its own NDA that you have to be signed off of. And to some degree, that actually it sort of ends up being a good thing in its own way, because teams aren't really blocked by any other teams for the most part. So like there's a team of like just 5-6 engineers that are working on like push notifications and iMessages backend. And there's just like a handful, shoestring budget team, but they're working on these apps that have like, there's like, at the time, like there are 40 billion push notifications every day. 6 billion iMessages every day, right? Supporting that system pretty much single-handedly. At a bigger company, like at Microsoft, there would have been like a team of at least 30, 40 people to do the same job. So by just letting, like, sort of empowering that small group of people to like pretty much do whatever they want or do whatever they need to do as necessary, you do sometimes have like duplicate work here and there across teams, but for the most part, the teams were working very fast. And we use the fact that the teams are small to reduce the amount of like meta work and collaboration that needs to be done. So Apple was pretty amazing. And Uber, so Uber was interesting. Uber had attracted a lot of tech talent from the major companies, right? They had a lot of people from Google and Meta. And I feel that Uber was never really able to kind of agree on what their engineering philosophy should be to some degree. So I felt that there was like kind of sort of tensions or like different viewpoints between, let's say, the Google people and Meta people. Like Google was known to be like, very like it's done when it's done, right? We'll take our time and achieve the perfect engineering solution. And Meta is like, move fast and break things, or let's just get stuff done, right? Deliver value. Those two philosophies are obviously like pretty much completely opposed. And as a result, I think that there's a lot of churn within Uber. I feel like Uber was kind of, I would say, maybe more veering on like the Google side of things. Right? A lot of the people in the management came from the Google philosophy. And I kind of feel that they focused too much on engineering excellence, like acted as if they were a company that had like limited money or had like cash cow, like Uber's was search and ads. You can work on all these moonshot projects that wouldn't go anywhere. It doesn't matter because we're still printing money at the end of the day. Uber is not in that situation. They're not profitable at the time, right? They're barely coming out with profits. And even just whether or not profitably was possible was even in question. So you have to operate very differently. And pay is great at Uber, which is what attracted all those people, but they just couldn't come out with a comprehensive sort of, cohesive, I guess, engineering culture is what I'm looking for. And then there were like multiple rounds of layoffs. There was the thing, and I joined after 2017. So 2017, there was tons of bad PR about Uber. And then Dara came in. He wanted to clean up the culture, and he wanted to make it more of a culture of swing the pendulum to the other side and make it a culture where there's like really good work-life balance. It's very healthy, very supportive kind of culture. As a result, I think what happened is that people really started taking things easy. So when I joined, the work-life balance was like really, really good. And the pay was really good too, which is really weird. And then of course that's not sustainable, right? Especially if the company's not actually making money. So IPO happened, the stock price dropped. Everyone was expecting the stock price to like multiply. It actually dropped quite a bit. And there were multiple rounds of layoffs. And since then, it's pretty much, I don't know what major advancements they kind of have done. It seems to be kind of more or less in the same sort of situation. I think things are kind of improving in their own ways. But yeah, I mean, that was the overall feedback on Uber.
I'd love to hear just like overall then, so work that, a place that you've been at, I'm assuming a common question that you get asked is like, is it worth it to join a FANG or top tech company? How do you respond to a question like that?
I think it is worth it at some point in your career, right? And it's not just for the resume building. It's also for the processes you'll learn. So for example, like this sort of meta work, right? Like how do you drive a project, right? So it can't just be like you coding up some massive thing, right? You kind of have to like work with other engineers, present a design document, a project plan, or getting people to buy into your idea, right? What's the impacts of doing this? Convincing the management, right? So communicating and things like that. So those are all the things that you kind of like learn at in a FANG or a bigger company. I guess you learn like the polish or sort of meta game. Specifically, I think the company where I've learned the most was actually Amazon. Like they actually had they instill a credible amount of like rigor and discipline. Honestly, if I had to do my career over again, I would join Amazon first.
Yeah, I've heard that. It's great to build the kind of foundations of having these kind of standards that you're kind of talking about that would carry you throughout the rest of your career.
Yeah, that's what you get at working at big companies. And of course, the pay and the benefits are usually better. The RSUs are worth actual money and not like stock auction. Stock is like a huge risk, right? But then overall, I would say compare that, from my personal experience, that startups actually give you a lot more job satisfaction. And you're a lot, like you touched on, they expose you to the customer like pretty much directly. And that feeling of sort of exhilaration, like customer impact, is something that's like, I've only ever got that at startups.
Yeah, that makes sense, that the scale of your impact to the work that you do is definitely a lot larger at a smaller company, just with the nature that is a smaller company. You're touching more things. I kind of shift gears real quick to one last question, which is that you are now currently a manager. You've had experience as a manager and director as well at other companies. What kind of piece of advice would you give to a like an IC or a report that wants to share upwards feedback to a manager that's maybe like more critical? I think that's always a difficult conversation to have because a lot of times it can feel, I guess, a unidirectional where it's like coming down maybe from your manager. But if you want to share it up, what kind of advice do you give either your reports or that you take to give upwards feedback to your manager and so on?
Whew, yeah, that is a difficult question. I think the way that you phrase it is really important. So let's say if I had to give feedback to my manager, I would kind of present it as like a problem that I have. And you can often use words like, let's say, I feel a certain way, right? Like I feel like I'm not being, I feel like sometimes I need to know how can I improve, right? Or a simple way is, let's say if I wanted to get more feedback from my own manager, that's what I ask them. Kind of frame it as something like as an issue that you have and that you need his help on or her help on to solve. Right? And then I think that kind of taps into like this sort of managerial ego and like, okay, you got a problem, let me help you solve it. That's kind of how I can do it. Like a lot of people have difficulty with it. I think it's like feedback is like pretty much the hardest part about working like in a corporate environment or even a startup environment. So I guess that's my answer.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like that rather than go to them and just tell them the problem that you think that they have, you talk about it in a way of a problem that you have, which makes sense because I mean, the reason why you probably want to give this feedback is because it's the way that they're maybe managing or the way that they're doing things is just not working for you. So I think it's fair to communicate it in that way. So yeah, I appreciate it. I think that's a great advice for that aspect. And thank you so much, Usman, software development manager at Amazon. Thank you so much, Usman, for coming on and sharing your experience and your advice.
Yeah, no worries, folks.
And that's all the time we have on this episode. Make sure to join me next time on the Culture of Code. Again, I'm Philly's team. Take care.
Bye.